At a time when Rome was fighting not to disappear from the map, a name emerged that would change the course of history: Publius Cornelius Scipio, the man who saved the Republic from its worst nightmare, and ended up paying the highest price for his greatness. They called him the African, not because of his origin, but because of what he conquered. He was the only one capable of breaking Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had humiliated Rome and spread terror throughout the Italian peninsula. Scipio not only defeated him on the battlefield, he outmatched him in cunning, in resolve, and in vision. But his victory did not come without consequences. Because in Rome, no man could shine too brightly without awakening shadows. The Senate, jealous of his popularity and fearful of his growing power, turned honor into suspicion, and gratitude into betrayal. This is not just the tale of an invincible general. It is the story of a young aristocrat who defied fate, rebuilt the pride of his people, and restored hope when everything seemed lost. But it is also the portrait of how a republic, unable to tolerate another man's glory, ended up exiling the very hero who had saved it. This is the rise, the glory, and the bitter exile of Scipio Africanus. On August 2, 216 BC, the Roman Republic hit rock bottom. On the plains of Cannae, in southern Italy, Hannibal Barca executed a maneuver that would go down in history as one of the most brilliant ever seen. With fewer men, he encircled the Roman army and slaughtered it without mercy. More than 50,000 legionaries were massacred. It was a defeat that paralyzed Rome, a wound so deep that many believed the end was near. But out of that tragedy, amid fear, confusion, and despair, an unexpected figure arose: Publius Cornelius Scipio, barely a 20-year-old officer, with no rank and no formal command, but with something in short supply among the survivors: leadership. While some soldiers, traumatized by the massacre, spoke of surrendering or abandoning the cause, Scipio stormed into the improvised assembly, unsheathed his sword, and swore an oath before the gods. "By Jupiter! I swear I will never betray Rome. And with this sword I shall strike down anyone who dares to do so." That act was more than a threat, it was a cry of identity. A spark ignited in the darkest night of Rome. And though he was just a young man then, in that moment, a general was born. A legend was born. Because great leaders are not forged in comfort, but in the fire of adversity. While Rome resisted Hannibal's blows as best it could, far from the Italian peninsula, in the contested lands of Hispania, another decisive war was being fought. There, the Roman commanders were Scipio's father and uncle, who for months had tried to stop Carthage's war machine, cut its supply lines, and secure the few allies Rome still had. But it all ended in tragedy. The Scipio brothers were betrayed by the Celtiberians, local allies in whom they had placed their trust, and fell in battle, overwhelmed by Carthaginian troops led by Hasdrubal Barca. It was a crushing defeat. For young Publius, the news was devastating. In a single day, he lost not only his father and uncle, but also a legacy he had not yet inherited. Rome, for its part, was paralyzed. No one wanted to take command of that doomed campaign. Senators hesitated, veterans stayed silent. It was a suicide mission. That was when Scipio, only 25 years old, stood before the Senate. Not as a reckless youth, but as a man who understood that pain could be transformed into purpose. With no experience as a general, he asked for command of the remnants of the Roman army in Hispania. And, faced with silence and the absence of volunteers, the Senate had no choice but to grant it. Scipio departed for Hispania as proconsul, leading a small, demoralized force. He carried no medals, no glory, no promises, only an unbreakable will, to avenge his family, restore Rome's honor, and halt Carthage's advance. He knew he was alone. But he also knew that if he triumphed, it would not only be a military victory. It would mark the beginning of a new era for Rome. Carthago Nova was not just another city on the map. It was the jewel of Carthage in Hispania, its main naval and military base, seat of government, arsenal, treasury, and symbol of power. Seizing it would deliver a devastating blow, not just tactically but psychologically as well. Yet to attempt capturing such a fortress, with an army still in training, was an undertaking bordering on madness. But Scipio did not think like others. He did not seek a prolonged war or head-on battles against the 3 Carthaginian armies scattered throughout the region. His mind was already several moves ahead. His plan was to strike where no one expected, swiftly and with surgical precision. With secret information from sailors of the allied city of Tarraco, Scipio discovered that the city, protected on 3 sides by the sea, had a weak point, a northern lagoon, which during low tide exposed a direct access to the walls. It was an opportunity that demanded perfect timing. On the day of the attack, while the defenders focused on repelling assaults by land and sea, Scipio ordered part of his troops to cross the lagoon at the precise moment when the tide receded. The Romans trudged across the muddy bed and scaled the inner defenses from the least protected flank. What had seemed impossible happened in just a few hours. Carthago Nova fell. It was a total victory. Scipio not only captured the city, he seized its arsenal, its war fleet, its treasury, and its secret archives. He gained prestige, morale, and a strategic advantage. More importantly, he proved that Rome did not need more men or more time. It only needed a leader with vision. Carthage felt the blow. For the first time since the beginning of the war, fear changed sides. After the conquest of New Carthage, Scipio did not let glory intoxicate him. He knew there were still 3 Carthaginian armies operating in Hispania, led by the fearsome Barca brothers, Hasdrubal, Mago, and Hasdrubal Gisco. Together, they represented an almost invincible threat. But separated, they were vulnerable. Scipio did not seek a war of attrition, but a series of swift strikes, executed like a surgeon on the enemy's exposed nerves. His goal: prevent the 3 armies from joining forces. Divide them, isolate them, defeat them one by one. As Hasdrubal Barca left Hispania to bring reinforcements to his brother Hannibal in Italy, Scipio turned his attention to the other 2 commanders. But before that, one of the most striking scenes occurred. The Romans intercepted Hasdrubal's army on its march north, defeated them at the Metaurus River, and sent his head, bloody and unglorious, to Hannibal's camp. It was a clear message: Rome no longer feared the Barcas. It was hunting them. Meanwhile, Scipio continued his offensive in Hispania. In the great battle at the Becula River, he thwarted the Carthaginians' plans to regroup. And when Mago and Hasdrubal Gisco finally decided to join forces, it was too late. Scipio confronted them on the plain of Ilipa, near modern-day Seville, with a smaller but better-trained army and a masterful plan. He placed his allied troops in the center and his veteran legionaries on the flanks, the opposite of his previous battles. When the battle began, the Carthaginians, confident, attacked the weak center. But as they exhausted themselves there, Scipio launched a devastating attack from both sides, enveloping the enemy in a maneuver that completely disrupted their lines. The Carthaginians' native allies deserted. Fear spread. By the end of the day, the Carthaginian army in Hispania was destroyed. It was not just a victory. It was the culmination of a campaign calculated with strategic coldness worthy of the greatest military geniuses. Scipio did not just win Hispania, he sealed the fate of the Carthaginian Empire. Rome began to realize that it had in its hands a general unlike any seen in generations. Scipio returned to Rome as a hero. He had defeated the Barcas in Hispania, dismantled their support network, and seized Carthage's most valuable possession in Europe. To many, he appeared as a savior. But in Rome, glory was never free of suspicion. Although he was received with respect, the Senate did not acclaim him as he deserved. They appointed him consul, despite his not meeting the minimum age, but his charismatic gestures, popularity among the people, and almost divine aura awakened the worst fears among the staunchest defenders of the Republic. To them, Scipio was not just a victor, he was a potential tyrant in the making. Among these guardians of the Republican order, one stood out: Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Elder. Cato deeply distrusted Scipio's refined lifestyle, his closeness to foreign cultures, and above all, his growing political influence. For Cato, austerity, discipline, and Roman tradition were sacred values. And Scipio, with his taste for Greek philosophy, grand spectacles, and charismatic leadership, represented a threat to that ideal. Tensions escalated when a scandal involved one of Scipio's close associates. Cato seized the moment to attack him publicly, accusing his circle of corruption and excess. He tried to remove him from power but failed. Scipio's popularity was still too strong. However, Rome was changing. The Second Punic War had left scars and awakened ambitions. Power was beginning to shift from the Senate to victorious generals. And that was something Cato would never allow without a fight. So, while the people hailed Scipio as the man who would save Rome, in the shadows, the network for his future downfall was being woven. Because in the Republic, military victories are forgotten, but political enmities endure. Rome knew it was not enough to expel Carthage from Hispania. To end the Carthaginian threat definitively, it had to strike at the root. Scipio knew this better than anyone. So he proposed the unthinkable: bring the war to Africa, to the very heart of the enemy. The Senate hesitated. Not for lack of merit, but for the audacity of the plan. Scipio did not just want to invade Africa, he wanted to force Hannibal, the same Hannibal who had ravaged Italy for years, to return home to defend it. It was a risky but brilliant strategy. Using Sicily as a base of operations, Scipio meticulously prepared his army. This was no ordinary campaign, it was the final battle for Mediterranean supremacy. Once in Africa, his forces easily defeated the first Carthaginian contingents. Panic spread through Carthage. And then the inevitable occurred: Hannibal was called back. Two military legends were about to clash. One, the tireless defender of Carthage. The other, the bold conqueror of Hispania. Both knew their encounter would determine the fate of their civilizations. The Battle of Zama was fought on October 19, 202 BCE, outside the walls of Carthage. Hannibal arrived with his final guard, a powerful force reinforced by 80 war elephants. But Scipio was not intimidated. He knew the key was not brute strength, it was control. With iron discipline, he ordered his troops to open corridors as the elephants charged. The animals, confused by the silence of the spears and the glare of polished helmets, passed through without causing havoc. Once disorganized, they were flanked and mercilessly cut down. The rest was a dance of military precision. Scipio knew every move of his enemy. He had studied Hannibal as a disciple studies his master, and that admiration became his most dangerous weapon. Within hours, the Carthaginian army was crushed. Over 20,000 dead and 15,000 prisoners sealed the victory. Carthage, defeated, had to accept a humiliating peace. It renounced its fleet, its colonies, and all imperial ambitions. And Hannibal, defeated for the first time decisively, abandoned his dream of a Carthaginian empire. Rome was now the undisputed power of the Mediterranean. And Scipio, its hero. But glory, as always in Rome, would be brief. Because even the greatest do not escape the envy of power. The image was etched into the collective memory: 80 African elephants charging furiously at the Roman legions, raising clouds of dust, roaring like a living storm. It was Hannibal's last card, his most imposing resource. Each of those animals could crush a squad with a single step. They were mountains in motion, armed with tusks, towers, and hatred. But Scipio was not overwhelmed by the spectacle. He had learned to conquer not only with the sword but also with the mind. He knew the elephants were fearsome, but also fearful. He ordered his soldiers to polish their armor and helmets to a mirror shine so that the African sun would bounce off them like blades of light. He instructed his military musicians to sound trumpets and horns at the precise moment. The goal was not to withstand the charge, but to break it before it began. When the elephants charged, the Romans did not engage in hand-to-hand combat. They parted like a curtain. They formed living corridors, letting the animals pass through them without encountering resistance. The pachyderms, disoriented by the glare, the sound, and the lack of targets, scattered. Some retreated, others ran toward their own lines, causing chaos among the Carthaginian troops. Then came the counterattack. From the flanks, Roman spearmen closed in and struck with surgical precision. Most of the elephants fell under a rain of steel. Of the 80, only 11 survived. The rest remained on the field as motionless monuments to the end of an era. That battle was not just a military victory. It was a masterpiece of control, tactical intelligence, and mastery of nerves and terrain. Scipio did not win by having more men. He won because he knew how to turn fear into strategy. From then on, the Romans understood that no monster was invincible if confronted with cunning. And Scipio, the African, earned a place among the immortals, not only as a warrior but as a genius. Rome was never merciful to men who were too great. And Scipio, the African, had become one of the greatest of all. His victories had saved the Republic, his tactical genius had humiliated Carthage, and his name echoed throughout the Mediterranean, and that, for many in the Senate, was simply intolerable. Scipio's enemies had not disappeared with the war. On the contrary, they had waited for the precise moment to bring him down. Cato the Elder, the eternal defender of the traditional republic, became the visible face of this campaign. And the chosen weapon was not the sword, but public trial. They accused his brother, Lucius Cornelius Scipio, of appropriating the spoils of war after defeating Antiochus III in Asia. Scipio, outraged at what he considered an outrage against his family, reacted as only a proud man would. He destroyed the campaign's financial records in front of everyone, in the Roman Forum itself. His gesture was applauded by the people, but it also sealed his political fate. In Rome, disobeying the Senate was an unforgivable act. That act of defiance, though brave, was interpreted as arrogance. Soon, the Scipios were swept into a whirlwind of trials, fines, and humiliations. Lucius was condemned, and Scipio was summoned to appear before the Senate on the very day commemorating his greatest victory, the Battle of Zama. But Scipio did not appear. Instead of attending the trial, he chose to retreat and offer sacrifices to the gods, giving thanks for the victory that had changed history. His absence was seen as a provocation, the final drop in a cup that many already wished to spill. The Senate confiscated his properties. They isolated him. They took everything from him except his fame, and his pride. Then, Scipio chose voluntary exile. "I exile myself, if my greatness is more than Rome can bear," he said before retiring to his villa in Laternum. There, far from the bustle of the forums, the judgment of men, and the ingratitude of his city, he spent his final years writing, cultivating, and remembering. Because even the greatest of heroes can fall. Not by an enemy's spear, but by the envy of those who swore to defend the same homeland he had saved. Scipio Africanus was not just a brilliant general. He was a figure who transformed the way Rome conceived war, leadership, and power. His legacy, though stained by exile and ingratitude, extended far beyond the battlefield. From a young age, Scipio understood that war was not just brute force. He knew how to use intelligence, psychology, and theatricality as weapons as effective as the sword. He introduced new tactics, such as mobility over rigidity, cunning over strength, and anticipation over reaction. At Zama, for example, he demonstrated that even the invincible Hannibal could be defeated, not by having a larger army, but by deeply understanding the enemy's mind. Politically, Scipio represented the eternal tension between charismatic reformers and the conservative system. He inspired admiration among the people but fear among the senators. Not because he was a tyrant, but because he embodied the future, a bolder, more imperial Rome, less controlled by the old aristocratic families. His figure became a model for future generations. Julius Caesar, Pompey, and even Napoleon would look upon his story with reverence. Because Scipio did not just win battles. He inspired his men to believe in the impossible. He taught them that a war is won first in spirit, and then on the field. And yet, Scipio paid dearly for his greatness. His military legacy was unquestionable, but his political legacy remained divided. Some saw him as a betrayed savior, Others as a leader who challenged too much the system that had elevated him. But time, as the ultimate judge, raised him above his detractors. In Rome's memory, Publius Cornelius Scipio was not just a consul or another general. He was the man who stopped Carthage, redrew the map of power, and, even in political defeat, left a mark that no trial could erase. Exiled, but not defeated. The man who had saved Rome retired not with hatred, but with dignity. Scipio Africanus settled in his villa at Laternum, a countryside residence far from political noise, the judgment of men, and the city that had once hailed him as its hero. There, surrounded by nature, he spent his final years in silence. He never returned to public life. He became a man of the countryside, a philosopher of his own history, writing his memoirs, cultivating the land, and reflecting on the weight of glory and the fragility of power. Despite his self-imposed exile, Scipio never renounced Rome. But he did withhold his body. In a final act of pride and disappointment, he ordered that he never be buried in the city that had forgotten him. "Ungrateful homeland, ye shall not have my bones," are said to have been his words. And so it was. On December 3, 183 BC, Scipio died at the age of 52. Ironically, that same year, in another corner of the Mediterranean, his great enemy also passed away, Hannibal Barca. As if fate had wanted to close the chapter of the two giants who shaped the Second Punic War. He was buried in Laternum, under a simple tombstone that still sparks debate among archaeologists and scholars today. Because although his body never returned to Rome, his story, his legacy, his name, never left. Scipio did not die forgotten. He died as he lived, on his own terms. It was not Rome that dictated his end. It was he who chose his final page, with the same resolve with which he once raised his sword and swore never to betray the Republic. The story of Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus is a powerful echo of an eternal truth: great men often do not fit within the structures they helped preserve. Scipio defeated enemies who seemed invincible. He saved his homeland in its darkest hour. He rewrote the art of war. He elevated Rome's prestige to levels that had previously been only a dream. And yet, when he was no longer useful to power, he was pushed into oblivion. The Rome he defended with his life was the same Rome that accused him, persecuted him, and let him die far from its forum. And so, the Republic revealed its most human face, ungrateful, fragile, fearful of another's brilliance. It feared that Scipio was too great to fit within its marble columns and parchment scrolls of law. But time delivers justice. Today, centuries later, few remember the names of the senators who signed his condemnation. But everyone knows Africanus. The strategist who defeated Hannibal. The man who turned every battle into a lesson of cunning and courage. The citizen who chose exile over betraying his principles. Scipio embodies that paradox only true giants face: to be loved by the people and feared by power. To triumph, and still lose. To win wars, but not politics. And yet, his shadow did not dissolve with the dust of centuries. It lives on in every story that honors the brave, in every strategy that recognizes intelligence over force, and in every memory that reminds us that true greatness needs no crowns, no statues. Only truth. Scipio Africanus was not just a general. He was a symbol of what a man can achieve when conviction, intelligence, and courage unite. His life reminds us that even the brightest heroes can be betrayed by the very homeland they swore to protect. But it also teaches us that true glory is not granted by titles or the judgments of men, but by the mark left on history. If this story moved you, if you feel Scipio's legacy deserves to be told again and again, I invite you to share this video with those who value history, strategy, and dignity. Like, comment your favorite part, and subscribe to our channel to continue discovering the lives of those who defied fate and marked eternity. Because a people who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it.